Bryant, Arkansas, a town often forgotten on national maps but known locally for its close-knit community and peaceful routines. On a sweltering summer afternoon in June 2025, the air sat heavy with a stillness that felt almost unnatural. The Mitchell household, tucked behind a line of pine trees on a suburban cul-de-sac, appeared as serene as any home on that block. It was a modest, well-kept house, a white porch swing gently swaying in the breeze, a tricycle abandoned by a toddler on the front walkway. Inside, however, tension brewed. 34-year-old Jarrod Mitchell had returned to the home of his estranged mother, under the guise of reconciliation. His life had been in a slow, downward spiral, drug relapses, psychiatric holds, and growing resentment toward those closest to him. His mother, Diane, had taken him in for the weekend, more out of maternal duty than optimism. She believed in second chances, even third ones. But what none of them knew was that Jarrod hadn't come home to mend bridges. He had come to end them. At precisely 3:42 p.m., neighbors reported hearing 3 distinct pops, then silence. No shouting, no cries. Just the eerie return of wind chimes and the distant bark of a dog. Inside the house, Diane lay slumped over the kitchen counter, her blood seeping into the wood grain. Her husband, Rick, had been shot in the living room, remote still in his hand. Jarrod's sister, Melissa, had tried to flee, her body found near the back door. Only 3 children, Diane's grandchildren, remained alive, locked inside a bedroom, too terrified to move. By the time the first squad car pulled up, the quiet street had become the scene of Arkansas's most chilling domestic crime in decades. Deputy Carlene Roberts was the first to arrive on scene. A seasoned officer with over 2 decades in law enforcement, she had seen her share of domestic disturbances and fatal overdoses, but nothing like this. The children's screams could be heard faintly from the second floor. Carlene drew her weapon and entered with caution, her boots sinking into blood just inside the doorway. The air inside was hot and pungent with the iron sting of spilled blood. She moved from room to room, clearing each one, until she found the 3 children huddled together in the closet of the upstairs bedroom, pale-faced and trembling. Their whispers were broken and surreal. One child, barely 7, clutched a drawing, a stick figure of a man with red crayon flames for eyes and a jagged black circle around his head. Carlene's voice cracked as she radioed for backup and EMTs. The house became a flurry of motion, crime scene tape, flashing lights, camera flashes. Detectives and crime scene techs began cataloging every shell casing, blood splatter, and footprint. But the killer wasn't among the dead. Jarrod Mitchell had vanished, his car gone, his phone off. As detectives began piecing together timelines, the children gave chilling accounts of hearing their uncle yell something about family betrayals before the gunfire. What had happened in the hours leading up to the massacre was unclear, but one thing was certain: Jarrod had planned it. And now, he was on the run. Jarrod's descent had been long and largely invisible to those outside the family. A former community college student, Jarrod had once been enrolled in a paramedic program. Smart, if socially awkward, he began experimenting with opioids during his 20s following a workplace back injury. His addiction became the defining rhythm of his life. Overdoses, rehab stints, and short jail sentences painted a clear path of decay. Psychiatric evaluations diagnosed him with bipolar disorder and possible schizoaffective symptoms, but he refused sustained treatment. He once called 911 on himself, claiming the walls were screaming. In recent months, his behavior had taken a darker turn. He ranted on social media about government surveillance, coded religious messages, and perceived slights by family members. Diane had confided to a neighbor just a week prior that she feared Jarrod was hearing voices again. Despite her fears, she had invited him over, hoping love could conquer the madness. But love wasn't enough. In the aftermath of the murders, the media painted Jarrod as a monster, while old classmates and acquaintances debated how someone so promising had fallen so far. Detectives now had the chilling task of understanding the killer's mind to predict his next move. State and federal agencies joined the manhunt. Jarrod's car, a rusted silver Dodge Neon, was found 2 counties away in a wooded park, abandoned but with clear boot prints leading into the dense forest. Bloodhounds were deployed, helicopters scanned from above, and a perimeter was set. But Jarrod was nowhere to be found. In the car, investigators found a burnt spoon, a used syringe, and a crumpled note that read, "Blood purifies." Cryptic references to biblical passages were scrawled on the vehicle's dashboard in Sharpie. While the search continued, detectives dug into Jarrod's online activity. They uncovered a disturbing blog, hosted anonymously, filled with manifestos about purity, divine justice, and family sins. Meanwhile, the children were placed under protective care, and a national alert went out. Jarrod Mitchell had officially become one of the FBI's most wanted fugitives. But he was more than a suspect, he was a phantom now, hiding somewhere in America's folds, convinced of a twisted mission. Days turned into a week with no leads. Then, a truck stop attendant in Missouri recognized Jarrod from the wanted posters. Surveillance footage showed a gaunt, disheveled man in a camouflage jacket buying energy drinks and duct tape. He paid in cash and left before police arrived. The footage re-energized the search. Behavioral profilers were brought in. They suggested Jarrod wasn't just hiding, he was preparing for something. The purchase of duct tape, rope, and non-perishables suggested a possible hostage situation or premeditated suicide. Law enforcement feared he might target more family members or even strangers. The children, now living with an aunt under 24/7 protection, drew pictures in therapy of Uncle Jarrod with fire in his eyes. One therapist noted the recurring symbols in their drawings, crosses, broken clocks, and bleeding hearts, perhaps echoes of the horror they witnessed. Each new detail added a piece to the puzzle, yet the picture it formed was more nightmare than narrative. A hunter stumbled upon a secluded cabin deep in the Ozark Mountains. From outside, it looked abandoned, but as police stormed in, they found signs of recent habitation. A sleeping bag, canned food, torn newspaper clippings about the murders, and a voice recorder lay on the table. The audio was chilling, Jarrod speaking in tongues, addressing someone named Mother Seraphine, and describing the killings as sacred justice. But he was gone again. Investigators believed he had fled hours before the raid. In the woods behind the cabin, they found what appeared to be makeshift grave markers, though no bodies were buried. It was symbolism, the profilers said. A twisted attempt at penance or prophecy. On one wall, written in soot, were the words, "The bloodline ends in flame." The air was so thick with dread it felt like the trees were holding their breath. As pressure mounted, the public demanded answers, and the state offered a $100,000 reward for any information leading to Jarrod's capture. Enter Naomi Kellerman, an independent crime journalist and podcaster known for covering cold cases. She latched onto the Mitchell case, drawn by the psychological complexity and familial betrayal. Naomi began her own investigation, speaking to neighbors, reading police reports, and even contacting Jarrod's old therapist. Through her research, she uncovered that Diane Mitchell had once reported sexual abuse committed against her children by an uncle, but the case had been buried quietly. Could this generational trauma have fueled Jarrod's descent? Naomi's podcast episodes gained traction, sparking debates about mental health, justice, and the cracks in the system. Law enforcement wasn't pleased with her interference, but her work uncovered inconsistencies in the official narrative, including a now-missing family heirloom gun that may have been the murder weapon. Her pursuit of truth placed her in Jarrod's crosshairs, whether she knew it or not. Naomi, ever the risk-taker, traveled to the Ozarks hoping to find the cabin site. Against warnings, she hiked into the woods alone with only a map and her recorder. What she didn't know was that Jarrod had returned to the area. That night, as she camped near a creek, her tent was slashed. She fled barefoot through the dark forest, phone and gear left behind. A rescue team found her 2 days later, dehydrated but alive. Nearby, investigators found a crudely made effigy tied to a tree, with Naomi's press badge stapled to its chest. The message was clear: Jarrod was watching, and now, he had a new obsession. Naomi later admitted in an interview that during those hours in the woods, she felt like the silence had a pulse. Jarrod's psychosis was now fully unmasked. Surveillance footage in a small Arkansas town showed him ranting in a church, claiming he was the left hand of judgment. He was driven by a belief that his family had been corrupted by original sin and that his killings were acts of cleansing. Detectives worked tirelessly, mapping his movements, tracing his purchases, and coordinating with local hospitals and shelters. Jarrod was unraveling. One night, he wandered into an emergency room, bleeding from his own self-inflicted cuts. He used a fake name, received stitches, and vanished again before staff could notify police. The net was closing, but time was running out. A stolen car was found near a derelict farmhouse. Inside was the missing gun, now confirmed via ballistics as the murder weapon. More disturbing were the walls covered in Jarrod's writing, biblical verses, family names, dates, and rambling messages like, "The serpent waits at the roots," and, "The blood runs backward in time." A single name, Eloise, repeated over 20 times, mystified detectives. It was clear he was planning a final act. The farmhouse contained blueprints of a courthouse and names of law enforcement officers involved in the case. Authorities realized they were not just hunting a fugitive but racing to stop a domestic terror event. SWAT surrounded a remote silo 2 miles from the farmhouse. Inside, Jarrod had stockpiled homemade explosives and rigged the entrance with booby traps. Using a negotiator, police tried to reach him. For hours, Jarrod shouted scripture, accused his family of ancestral crimes, and demanded the return of his cleansing flame. Negotiators wore him down. Just before sunrise, he emerged shirtless, emaciated, weapon in hand. A sniper held aim, but Jarrod dropped the gun and fell to his knees. The nightmare, at least for now, was over. Jarrod's trial gripped the nation. The courtroom was filled with survivors, media, and protesters. The defense pleaded insanity, citing years of mental illness and untreated trauma. Prosecutors presented journal entries, audio recordings, and the timeline of the killings. Jarrod sat emotionless as testimonies detailed the brutality. Naomi testified as a witness and warned of the dangers of ignoring early mental health signs. Reporters captured her steely gaze as she described her near-death experience. The jury deliberated for 3 days. Verdict: guilty on all counts. Sentence: life without parole. For some, justice; for others, an unfinished wound. In the months following the trial, the surviving children began school again under new names. Therapy was ongoing. Naomi published a best-selling book on the case. Deputy Carlene was promoted and initiated a program focused on mental illness intervention. The Mitchell home was demolished, replaced by a memorial garden. Yet scars remained, not all of them visible. Jarrod had left behind more than death. He'd left behind questions of how far trauma can echo, and what society must do to break that cycle. Naomi's final podcast episode aired a year after the trial. It was titled, Bloodline, Endings and Beginnings. She spoke of the children's courage, the system's failure, and the thin line between victim and perpetrator. She closed with a quote from Diane Mitchell's old diary, discovered posthumously, "We survive by choosing to love even when we fear. I just pray it's enough." Naomi ended the episode with a quiet sigh and said, "If you hear someone suffering, listen. If you see someone lost, reach. That may be the thing that saves us all." The episode went viral. Politicians referenced it in debates on mental health funding. A nation listened. And learned. On a spring morning, the community gathered at the memorial garden where the Mitchell home once stood. Flowers bloomed along engraved stones bearing the victims' names. The children, now smiling and playing, placed small painted rocks among the roses. A neighbor read a poem aloud, her voice shaking, "From roots once soaked in sorrow, blooms rise toward light." Naomi stood among them, not as a reporter, but as a witness to hope. The town of Bryant had been scarred, but not broken. From blood and tragedy, something resilient had grown. And in that garden, surrounded by quiet, there was finally peace.